I saw a stat the other day that was really refreshing to see, and it confirmed something that I've been feeling for a long time. It said that less than 20% of Americans now feel comfortable affiliating with a political party. Now, that that confirms a thought that I've had for a while now, that where I think that maybe in less than 10 years, maybe a little bit more, who knows. I think that we could see the end of both the Democratic and Republican Party. I know it sounds crazy to say, but I'm going to tell you why I think that. So, I'm going to give you my 5 reasons here. I think that people could only be let down so many times, and let's be honest, both these parties, whoever's been in power, has betrayed their constituents like crazy. Terrible stuff. You could go back to the Trump tax cuts that weren't actually tax cuts for the middle class, where he just rearranged some things. But that I have plans to make another video that goes into that in detail. But just trust me, they weren't tax cuts. If anything, they're sneaky tax increases. Now to get more current, the Biden administration, pretty sure they ran on the idea of canceling student loans, and a lot of people voted for him for that exact reason. And looks like that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. So those are just two things that I think a lot of people can relate to, with taxes and student loans, two of the biggest expenses of our lives, and dangled out for us to vote on, and just to get double crossed. I'm going to get into a lot more things in the future that we've been betrayed on, but I just wanted to give two examples that I think everybody could relate to. Now, the second reason, the mainstream media, I think that's the biggest reason that people have felt that they have to be a Democrat or Republican or vote that way for, our lifetimes. I think these parties have been around for, I want to say, about 150 years or so. I know the founders didn't want them, but they've, I think, eventually Andrew Jackson started the Democrat Party, and the Republicans were basically just became the opposite of that. But the mainstream media has this condescending tone anytime something's brought up about how more voters are leaning independent. Especially right now, I see articles about it every day, because I'm somebody who's been a proud lifelong independent, because I hate things on both sides. I firmly disagree with positions on both sides. I'll get to that in the future too. I have a lot to say bashing both sides, so sit tight for that. But yeah, so they have this condescending tone anytime independent momentum is brought up, that, oh yeah, people, a lot of people think they're independent, but they're not actually independent. They they still vote just like a Democrat or just like a Republican, but as if they they're around since the creation of mankind, or being of mankind. But luckily that influence is dying off, because as I put here, the dying mainstream media, I think they are quickly dying, because I mean, you could point to just strictly data points to show that like CNN has been hemorrhaging money ever since Trump ever since Trump lost. They're pretty sure they were doing poorly before he got in, and then they're obviously popular with when he wasn't, because they had plenty to say about him. And now I saw an article that said they lost about 70% of their viewership since he's been out of office, and a lot of their viewership statistics actually comes from those TVs that are just left on at airports or gas stations that nobody watches. So I don't expect them to be around for too long. I think cable TV in general is, that's something that's withering away. Things like YouTube, and so many more people watch that. Look at Joe Rogan has 70 million viewers. I think CNN only gets 200,000 viewers a night now. Fox has gotten up to a million, but that's because they're the only conservative network on TV. So, you know, obviously they're going to have a little bit of a bump for that. When I think you probably have what, like 4 or 5 uh, news networks that lean more liberal. Regardless, not to get off into the weeds, I think this is a dying formula, and thankfully it's a dying formula because they just pump our heads with garbage constantly. So the next reason is extremism. Both parties have gotten very ugly with this stuff, and I think it's safe to, that 20% number I mentioned before. I think that's because it's safe to say that a good 80% of people really don't like the extremism stuff. It's just ugly, ugly stuff. Whether it's the flag waving Republicans or the liberals, or like laying down in front of freaking bulldozers to protest. Like no, most people aren't like that, but those are the loudest people on both sides. And to be honest, that's what the party is sort of taken on in its characteristics, which I don't know why. I think it's pretty bad strategy. But for example, this Texas governor to just all of a sudden out of nowhere just ban abortions in the state. I mean, geez, that's pretty extreme. I mean, I personally, I'll say it, I'm very pro-choice because I think the state has no right to tell people what to do. But to go the other end of the spectrum, I feel the same way about the medicine mandates that people are being threatened to lose their jobs over, with glee from a lot of these politicians, like the one from New York. But yeah, this stuff is all nonsense. It's garbage. It's toxic stuff, and I think a lot of people are sick of it on both sides. So I think these positions are really to the detriment of these two parties. But hey, whatever. That's why over 50% of people are now identifying as independent, and I couldn't be happier about that. We just need to get more organized about it because it's a disconnected 50%. But there's some serious voting power right there to be had. Now, this fourth reason, this might seem a little bit unrelated to the whole political aspect of things, but I'm going to do my best to tie it in. So I don't know how many of you follow the economy or the stock market closely. I didn't always follow it, but I've taken a big interest in it over the past few years because I think a lot of it's cool stuff. But just to summarize it, we have not just been kicking the can down the road, but man, yeah, to say we're kicking the can down the road is an understatement. There is an economic apocalypse that will happen someday. I don't know when. It's impossible to predict when, but and I'll get into some like the reasons why for that in future videos because I think it's really interesting to talk about, and hopefully you think it's interesting. We'll see. But once that happens, then the lies, the deception, the sort of veneer will really get exposed, and I think that's when things can really escalate quickly for these politicians who've been just screwing with our money and emotions and lives. for a long time now. Now, the last one, history. We go a few directions with this. Like I said before, we didn't always have political parties. The founders actually were very uncomfortable with the idea of forming political parties. I think the big initial opposition was between George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. Washington did not want political parties because he thought it was, a sort of a toxic situation, but Hamilton wanted a larger government, which, ultimately was started the Democrat Party. But what I'm getting at is that it's not something that's been around forever, and these things go in cycles, and it's went on for a long time because money and media have been concentrated into these two parties. But once things get exposed, once things reach a breaking point, that's when we start to see some serious change. And it might be scary for a little bit. I know it's vague, but I think better times are ahead. And what I'm really trying to do here is encourage people to be proud of being a political independent, because I know it could feel be a bit of an isolating feeling to feel that you're politically independent, but let's make that our tribe. I know people are tribal by nature. That's why the Democrat and Republicans became such a hot thing. But let's take pride in being independent. Let's make that our party. And I really want to lead that charge. So hopefully this resonates with a lot of people. I think a lot of people are frustrated or disgusted with both sides. And, let's congregate in the middle and be proud of that and say it loud and proud and with honor. And, if this can pick up momentum, I'll be thrilled. And I think it could do a lot of good, do a lot of healing for the state of things. But if you like what I had to say, please give it a like and subscribe, and appreciate you watching. I'll see you soon. Thanks.